Good evening and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Bhante Suddhāso, and this evening I'll be talking a bit about one of the less commonly discussed meditation techniques in Buddhism, the recollection of the Devas, devatānussati. And here referring to the description that we find in the Anguttara Nikaya, which appears in a few places in the Anguttara Nikaya, but this particular one I'm looking at here is the Mahanama Sutta from the Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 6, sutta number 10. So I'll start by paying homage to the Buddha, and then I'll talk a bit about what it says in the sutta here and how that relates to our practice, and how to include this in our meditation practice. So we'll start with homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So, as mentioned, we'll be talking a bit about devatānussati, recollection of the Devas. And the Devas are a term which refers to the relatively broad category of beings who live in states of existence substantially more pleasant than the human state of existence. And in the suttas, the Buddha has many interactions with devas. So devas are somewhat correspondent to figures which we find in other cosmologies and mythologies and pantheons in various religions and spiritual traditions. So there's some overlap with, for example, the concept of angels from Christianity and some other systems. There's some overlap with the concept of the gods or demigods that we find in most of the pre-Christian European systems, so including the Greek pantheons, the Norse pantheons, and so on. There's, again, a lot of overlap there. And also with many of the earth spirits, which we find mentioned in countless systems around the world. So discussions of leprechauns and pixies and fairies and dryads and all those kinds of beings. So beings which are less bound to coarse physicality than humans are. So most of the devas still have some kind of connection with the physical world. Only the very highest categories of devas are entirely mental. So most of them still have some connection to the physical world. But their relationship with the physical world is not as uncomfortable as it is for humans. So devas are not so afflicted by heat and cold. They don't get sick. They don't suffer from disease or illness of the body, hunger and thirst and so on. So a lot of the common, ordinary, daily ailments of humans and animals don't have anything to do with devas, doesn't affect them. So their lives have a very low dukkha level. It's still dukkha because they're still living in samsara, but the coarse dukkha of having human physical bodies or animal bodies is the devas don't have this kind of coarse dukkha. They have the general dukkha of being unenlightened, the general dukkha of having greed and aversion and delusion in the mind, but they don't have the coarse dukkha of things like illness and old age and so on. The devas also live extremely long lives. The lowest devas live for hundreds of years. The highest devas live for multiple eons, so extremely long, lasting lives. And of course, it's possible through cultivating ordinary good karma to be reborn as devas. And when that karma runs out, then, or when less positive karma surfaces, then to be reborn in lower realms. So according to the suttas, all of us have been devas in the past. And if we don't attain awakening in this life, it's quite likely that at some point we'll be devas again in the future. So there's nothing extraordinarily special about being a deva. It's just one of the many possible conditions within samsara that one can experience. However, it's a particularly pleasant form of samsaric existence, and often it's what people are aiming at. So this wish to be reborn in a very pleasant state of existence, without all the worries and troubles of ordinary human life. So here we have from Anguttara Nikaya 6.10, so chapter 6, sutta number 10, the Mahanama Sutta. This is a sutta on a list of recollections that the Buddha recommends. So this includes recollection of the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, recollection of one's own virtue, recollection of one's own generosity. So that's all very good stuff to keep in mind. And then finally, recollection of the Devas. And the description that we find here in the sutta, so the Buddha says, a disciple of the noble ones recollects the deities, recollects the Devas. There are the Devas of the 4 great kings, the Devas of the 33, the Devas of Yama, so that's the Chatu Maharajika Deva, the Tavatimsa Deva, and the Yama Deva. There are the Tusita Devas. Tusita means contented. For some reason, the translation here says joyful, but that's wrong. The word Tusita means contented. The gods who love to create, that's Nimanarati Deva. The gods who control the creations of others, Parinimmitavasavati Deva. If one is used to chanting the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, these names of different categories of devas will be familiar. And it continues, the gods of Brahma's host, so Brahmakayika Deva, and devas even higher than that. So this is going through first the standard sensual sphere devas, the devas who are still very much involved in sensuality. It's just a much more refined and pleasant kind of sensual existence than what humans have. But in the suttas that we have about these levels of devas, they're still interested in things which seem relatively coarse. So interested in nice possessions, interested in romantic activities, interested in food and drink, though of course the relationship that devas have with these things is much more refined than humans do. But then it gets into the Brahmakayika Devas. So these are devas who live a much more exalted state of existence. So more in line with the kind of happiness and contentment that one experiences through deep meditation practice, through cultivating the Brahma Viharas, Metta, Karuna, Mudita, and Upekkha, through cultivating the jhanas, these states of deep concentration. Then one experiences this extremely unworldly bliss, which is similar to the normal state of being for the Brahma Devas. And it just, the sutta here just generally mentions devas even higher than these. So that's referring to the mind-only devas. So the highest category of devas are the ones who are existing entirely in their own mental abstract world. So they have no physical body at all. They have no relationship at all with the physical world. They exist entirely inside the world of their own mind. And these correspond with the most subtle kinds of meditative attainments one can have. So the experience of infinite space, the experience of infinite consciousness, the experience of nothingness, and the experience of neither perception nor non-perception. So this first thing is just talking about recollecting, again, these different kinds of devas, bringing to mind what devas are, the different categories of devas. So starting with the lowest ranking. Actually, there's one even lower than this. There's the Bhuma Deva, the Devas that live here on the earth with us. But then there's the Devas of the 4 great kings. So these are ones who are just one step above the human realm, living lives not dramatically different from humans, just much more pleasant and peaceful. And then going up through this list, and if you like, you can find elsewhere detailed descriptions of each one of these forms of devas, each one of these deva realms. So first is just keep calling to mind that these states of existence are real, that they're possible to experience, that there's something which we've been in the past and which we can be in the future. Then the Buddha says one should reflect. When those devas passed away from here, that is, when they died as human beings, they were reborn there because of their faith, morality, learning, generosity, and wisdom. So in Pali, that's sila, saddha. Saddha is faith. Sila, morality. Sutta, which means one's knowledge, one's education. And in the discourses, that normally refers specifically to knowledge of the Dhamma. So knowledge of the Dhamma. Chaga means one's generosity, but chaga also has the meaning of letting go. So chaga has this double meaning, both of generosity and also of relinquishment. And finally, panya. So panya is this quality of wisdom or discernment. So one should reflect when those deities, those devas passed away from here, they were reborn there because of their faith, morality, knowledge of the Dhamma, their generosity, and their wisdom. And the Buddha says we should reflect. I also have the same faith, morality, knowledge of the Dhamma, generosity, and wisdom. So, and then the Buddha says, when a disciple of the Noble One recollects their faith, morality, knowledge, generosity, and wisdom, both of themselves and of the devas, then their mind is not full of greed, hatred, and delusion. At that time, their mind is unswerving. So it's ujjugata, literally means it's direct, it's straight. So it's pointed directly at the Dhamma, based on the devas. So based upon this practice of recollecting the devas. And it says, a disciple of the Noble Ones whose mind is unswerving, it says finds inspiration in the meaning. What is he translating here as inspiration? There's actually no word here that means inspiration. That's interesting. Yeah, literally it means one understands the meaning. One understands the Dhamma, and one gains joy connected with the Dhamma. There's no word here that means inspiration. I don't know why the translation has the word inspiration. There's no Pali word that connects to that. And he carries on, when one is joyful, one experiences euphoria. When there is euphoria, the body becomes tranquil. When the body is tranquil, one becomes happy. When one is happy, the mind enters samadhi. So this is, again, as mentioned in the previous discourse that we discussed this morning, this sequence, starting with joy connected with the Dhamma, then based upon that joy connected with the Dhamma, one becomes euphoric and tranquil, and the mind enters easily into samadhi. So one is able to enter into deep, steady, and focused states of meditation based upon joy of the Dhamma. And the Buddha continues, he says, this is called the disciple of the Noble Ones, who lives balanced among people who are unbalanced, who lives untroubled among people who are troubled. They've entered the stream of the Dhamma and developed the recollection of the Devas. So again, the primary point here is to reflect upon what qualities the Devas had cultivated in their previous lives in order to have the necessary karmic conditions to be reborn as Devas. And then to recognize that I also have those same qualities of faith, morality, Dhamma knowledge, generosity, and wisdom. So that means that I also, again, assuming that I don't make sufficient progress towards full awakening, I also will likely be reborn as a Deva, because I've cultivated the karmic foundation for that. I've cultivated the kind of good karma that leads towards becoming a Deva. And this is a way of cultivating, first off, a positive self-esteem connected with the wholesome. So recollecting one's own good qualities, recollecting that we have within ourselves the necessary good karma to be reborn as Devas. It's also a way of diminishing fear of death, because we know that if we're practicing the Dhamma sincerely, then we do not need to fear the lower realms. We don't need to worry about being reborn as an animal or a ghost or in one of the hell realms. We don't need to worry about that, because we can recollect all of the good karma that we've been building up, the same good karma that led to the Devas becoming Devas. And also recognizing that, again, even if we don't attain awakening in this lifetime, at a bare minimum, we stand an excellent chance of being reborn as a Deva. So we'll at least have a pleasant life in our next life around. So all of that creates the condition for the mind to be joyful and peaceful. So we don't need to fear death. We don't need to worry about what's going to happen in our next life. We can actually recognize that we've cultivated a lot of good, wholesome qualities, which at a bare minimum will lead to rebirth in an extremely pleasant, heavenly state of existence. And at best, it might actually bring us all the way to awakening. So as the Buddha mentions at the end here, one who practices this way has entered the stream of the Dhamma, the Dhamma Sota. So this indicates that this is also a way of approaching stream entry, which is the first stage of awakening. So this are a few brief words on the practice of recollection of the Devas. So what's given here in the discourse is just a general framework, a general outline, but one can practice this in whatever way is useful or relevant. So one way which I've actually found very useful in the past is to combine this with metta practice. So I would bring to mind the Devas, so recollecting the Devas, their qualities and aspects, and then I would wish well for them. So wishing for the Devas to be happy, wishing for them to be joyful, wishing for them to be peaceful, wishing for them to have long and pleasant lives. And that brought a lot of joy to the mind. So this both a sense of connection and appreciation with the Devas, but also a lot of joy and happiness in cultivating metta for the Devas. And then that made it easier then to cultivate metta for all beings. But the practice of starting with metta for the Devas for a period of time was something which I found extremely helpful. So it's a combination of recollection of the Devas with the practice of metta. Again, this can also be a very useful practice if one is feeling depressed or low self-esteem, or if one has fear of death or fear of rebirth, particularly fear of lower rebirth, or even rebirth as a human. I mean, just the thought of going through the first 20 years of a human life is already terrifying enough. Forget about the hell realms. Just being a child again is already pretty terrifying. So we can recollect, well, actually, I have an excellent chance of being reborn as a Deva, in which case I don't have to go through childhood. Devas get to skip all of that awkward stuff which us meaty humans have to go through. So these are ways of cultivating a sense of joy and tranquility connected with the Dhamma, which then can free the mind to more readily enter into deep meditation. So I think that's all I have to say for the moment on this concept of the recollection of Devas, this practice. So it's another tool that you can put in your meditation toolkit, and every now and then bring it out and play with it and see how it affects your mind. So at this time, if there's any questions or comments, I'll be happy to take some questions. And hello to the people joining in online. So hello to Rick, Suzanne, Alyssa, Sleep Doc, Monal, Philip, Margaret, Bhumika, John, Ming Ming, Yankee, Paul, Jojo, Ja, Jayanta, and Amaranta. Good to see all of you. And I see a couple questions here. Jojo says, if I remember correctly, I recall that the Buddha mentioned that if one practices correctly, you can will what particular realm you are reborn in. Is this true? Can one wish for things in this life if their practice is done well and those wishes coming true? Yes, you're probably thinking of the Sankharuppapatti Sutta from the Majjhima Nikaya. I don't remember the number off the top of my head. It's fairly early on in the Majjhima Nikaya. Sankharuppapatti Sutta, which I think Bhikkhu Bodhi translated as rebirth through aspiration. That's one place where the Buddha actually speaks quite directly about the fact that if one has a strong intention to have a particular kind of rebirth, and one has a certain amount of good karma, then you will get what you want. So it's a little bit hard to be 100% certain because you never know what kind of karma you have lingering from past lives. But the Buddha was clear that one does have a certain amount of ability to steer one's rebirth. This is actually part of the foundation of what later developed into Pure Land Buddhism, by the way. Pure Land Buddhism is based upon this concept that one can form the intention to be reborn in a specific realm of existence. So Pure Land Buddhism then is based on the idea that, well, if you want to be reborn in a particular realm, naturally it should be one where conditions are ideal for practicing Buddhism. So they constructed a whole form of Buddhist practice built entirely around rebirth through aspiration. In other schools of Buddhism, it's not really heavily emphasized. The emphasis is more on developing the factors of awakening. But yes, it is true. This is something that we find mentioned in a few places in the early discourses, not only that particular sutta. And also wishing for specific things in one's next life. Yes, that's also mentioned in a few places. Yeah. Just keeping in mind that ultimately whatever you get is still within the realm of samsara, and therefore it's still anicca, dukkha, anatta. So it's still temporary, unsatisfying, and impersonal. So yes, you can get what you want. Yep. But it will not be satisfying. Which is why ultimately the Buddha recommends that we aim at complete awakening. And Sleep Doc asks, can one attain the state of Nibbana from the Deva realm or only the human realm? And if only from the human realm, wouldn't it be preferable to be reincarnated as a human? Well, first off, we don't normally use the word reincarnate in Buddhism. We usually prefer the word rebirth, to be reborn. And this is because the word reincarnation is usually assumed to carry with it the connotation of an immortal soul, which we don't have that concept in Buddhism. But yes, it is possible to attain awakening as a Deva. In fact, there's many recorded incidents of this in the early discourses. There's many places where it mentions Devas becoming stream enterers, once returners, non-returners. It's even possible to become an Arhat as a Deva. However, there's also a number of cases where it's pointed out that Devas, because their lives are so pleasant, they have so little ordinary dukkha, they tend to get distracted very easily. So although it's possible for Devas to attain awakening, it's somewhat challenging because they tend to be distracted by pleasure all the time. So it's often said that the human realm is ideal for practicing Dhamma because we have, well, first off, we have a sufficiently developed intellect to understand the Dhamma. Whereas for animals, for example, their intellect is not well developed enough. It's very hard for them to understand Dhamma. But also because the human realm tends to have an optimal mixture of pleasure and pain. The human realm, while it's considered a positive rebirth, it's on this dividing line between the pleasant realms and the painful realms. So animals are on the painful side, humans are on the pleasant side, but this is where the dividing line is. So that mixture of pleasure and pain, we have enough pain to keep us motivated, but our conditions are still good enough that we're able to practice the Dhamma effectively without getting too confused. So it's usually considered ideal to practice Dhamma as a human, but it is possible to attain awakening as a Deva. And Alyssa asks, can you please explain more about the other aspect of Chaga that you mentioned, letting go, and how is it differentiated in the suttas? Well, it's just the word has two meanings, which are connected. So the meaning of generosity and the meaning of relinquishment. And in different suttas, depending on the context, one aspect or another is emphasized. So it's just the word. The word has these two meanings, and depending on context, it indicates which meaning is more intended. And in many places, it doesn't seem to give a more weight to one meaning or the other, in which case we can take both as equally intended. And Manal says, do the Devas actually have a job or a function they are fulfilling on earth in order to live out their very long life? No, their lives are as meaningless as ours. Yeah, there's no particular point in being a Deva. No, if I understand your question correctly, there's no point. And there's no point to anything in samsara. It's just a bunch of meaningless running around in circles. So the Devas are just doing the same thing we're doing. They're just having a more pleasant time of it. And Scott says, I've only been following the precepts for 5 years. Let's rephrase that. I've been following the precepts for 5 years. Good for me. Okay, great. Very good. I'm very happy you've been practicing the precepts for 5 years. That's incredible. You should be patting yourself on the back. Every morning you should wake up and say like, wow, I am a really amazing person. I've been following the precepts for 5 years. That is incredible. I have really good morality. Wow, 5 years. That's a really long time. Some people have a hard time following precepts for 5 minutes. And I've been doing it for 5 years. Wow. I'm such a wonderfully amazing person with really strong morality. Good for me. That's the way you should be thinking, Scott. So Scott's question continues. Fear of the lower realm pervades. I'm gradually gaining confidence to help people. However, encountering hostile individuals or environments is mentally destabilizing. Any ideas? Yeah, so once again, recollect your own virtue, recollect your own good qualities. And I think you'll find you're overflowing with them. Again, just the fact you've been following the precepts for 5 years, that's incredible. That's not something to set aside lightly. And fear of the lower realms, you don't need to fear the lower realms because you've cultivated so much good karma through following the precepts and trying to help people. So again, recollect your own compassion and generosity. And the fact that you're trying to improve, you're trying to be even better than you already are, that's amazing. Yeah, good for you. That's really delightful. And the track you've put yourself on is the track that leads to the higher realms or even to awakening. So you have no need to fear the lower realms at all. And yeah, sometimes you'll encounter hostile people or hostile circumstances. Ideally, avoid them if possible. If not possible, then beforehand, cultivate a lot of metta and samadhi. So when you go into those situations, your mind is already peaceful and gentle. And when you're in those situations, watch how it's affecting your mind and try to take breaks from time to time. Breaks really help a lot. And spend time around peaceful people in peaceful situations. Yeah, and over time it gets easier. Yeah, and be gentle on yourself because until you attain awakening, the mind will be prone to expressing unwholesome behaviors. So every now and then you're going to screw up and express unwholesome behavior. That's to be expected. But just keep reminding yourself of your commitment to goodness, and over time that will get stronger and stronger. And Philip says, if the idea of the Devas isn't especially inspiring, being foreign, abstract, etc., foreign, I think literally every single culture in every single location around the entire human globe has the concept of Devas. They just use different words and terminology, but literally everywhere in the world, every culture that has ever existed has this concept. Actually, it's only very recently, with the rise of secular materialism, that people have started to dismiss the idea of Devas. Up until very recently, it was universally accepted by almost everyone in the world. So it's actually very recent, this bizarre recent trend to reject the existence of other beings. So I wouldn't call it foreign. As for abstract, it's no more abstract than you are. Sometimes we can relate to these things through thinking about dreams. So if you've ever had a dream in which had that quality of serenity and joy, where nothing was going wrong and you were getting what you wanted the moment you wanted, so kind of perfect dream. That's a bit what it's like to be a Deva. It's like being in one of those like perfect heavenly dreams, except it doesn't end when you wake up. It keeps going for a few more 100 years. So Philip asks, what is an alternative subject for developing Ujjukuta and other path factors? Well, this is part of a list of 10 recollections, so just use the other 9. That's part of the wonderful things about the Buddha's teachings. He gives us a lot of different tools. So if one of the tools isn't really working that well for you, well, then just use the other ones. There's no shortage. And Stephen says, are there suttas that cover admirable qualities of certain devas as there are with householders? Yes, there are. My mind is blanking right now on exactly where you could find them. But yes, there are such suttas. Amaranta says, all the devas during all the existence, what is their function? I don't see the point. As Buddhists, do we need to pray to them for something or only feel gratitude or admiration for them? In my pre-Hispanic culture, devas are responsible for everything. I love the idea of the deva of rain and trees. We respect more nature, believing these beliefs. Yeah, so also in the suttas, we find reference to rain devas and nature devas and tree devas and flower devas. So very similar to the various kinds of animism of nature spirits, which we find, again, across the world. Like in every human culture, there's been concepts of these kinds of beings, nature devas, tree devas, rain devas, and so on. Yeah, it's nothing new, and it's also in Buddhism. But no, you're not required to pray to them for anything, and you can if you want to, but it's not a requirement in Buddhist practice. Admiration for them, sure, yeah, because they built up a lot of good karma to be reborn as devas. So we should respect the good things they did in order to become devas. And what the Buddha is really encouraging in the sutta is the most important thing, actually, is to pay attention to those same good qualities within ourselves. So yeah, we admire the devas. We appreciate the good things they did in order to become devas. For example, recently I was talking about the vows of Sakka. So what he did in previous lives in order to be reborn as one of the highest ranking devas. So we can, again, reflect on the good things they did to become devas, and the fact that we have those same good things within ourselves. The fact that we also have the necessary conditions to be reborn in those same joyful states of being. Amit says, how to recollect if we have never seen them? Well, then recollect the Buddha's teachings about them. Also, don't be so sure you've never seen them. A lot of people have seen devas. They just don't recognize it as such. They write it off as something else. They're everywhere, and if you pay attention, you can see them. But it's true. Most people don't notice them. It's not particularly common. Suzanne says, are there accounts of Devas practicing Dhamma? I already answered this. Yes. There are many such accounts. Yeah. That's the last. Oh, no, here's one more question. Rick says, are there negative or harmful Devas? Yes, there are, because they're also unenlightened beings. So they're also prone towards greed, hatred, and delusion, just like the rest of us. So there are cases of, in the suttas, there's mentioned Devas which are angry, jealous, resentful, hostile, greedy. Yeah, there are such things. So not all of them are necessarily completely moral. But many of them are, because again, in order to be reborn as a Deva, one needed to have cultivated a lot of good karma in past lives, which means one will tend to have a strong habit already in the mind, a habit of goodness. So I would say the Devas are more likely to have a habit of goodness because that's what it took to be reborn as a Deva in the first place. But most certainly there are Devas who have harmful tendencies. And for example, the Asuras are a category of Devas which are known for being angry and violent. Yakas, in the suttas, the term yaka is actually just a general word that means Deva. But later on, it came to be used to mean specifically malevolent Devas. And Maras, actually Mara is a category of Devas. So there's the Mara Devas are a category of Devas that are particularly hostile towards spiritual practitioners, towards people who are trying to develop wisdom. So yeah, there most definitely are malevolent Devas, but they seem to be in the minority. So I wouldn't worry about them too much. And TJ says, is a Mara the same as an Asura? No, they're different. The Asura Devas are relatively low in the power ranking. Maras are actually quite high. They're actually at the highest of the sensual domain Devas. So the Mara Devas are part of the Paranimita Vasavati Deva realm. So very high. Moraya says, if we are fairly certain that we have encountered negative Devas in meditation or sleep paralysis on several occasions, is this a sign that something is wrong with our mind state? What should we do? It's probably a sign that you should do a lot of metta. So do a lot of metta, and also specifically metta for Devas, as I was mentioning earlier. Also dedication of merit to the Devas. Which is a dedication of merit to the Devas, is a very important practice done throughout the Buddhist world. But it's one which in Western Buddhism doesn't get talked about very often. But it is one of the central fixtures of Buddhist practice for millennia now. And it will help with exactly this problem. So yeah, do a lot of metta, especially metta for Devas. Dedicate merit to the Devas. Also ask the Dharma protecting Devas to watch over you, to look out for you. Ask the Bodhisattvas to watch over you, protect you. These are all things which will help to one degree or another. Yeah, and when you do encounter hostile Devas, just practice metta for them. When you see them, wish them well. Be friendly towards them. And that looks like the last question. So if there's nothing else, we can go ahead and end at this time. Okay, so we'll go ahead and conclude the session with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you all next time.